I'll concede your point just for brevity, but
What? Brevity? We don't do that around here. It's probably
No.
Citrus, or what is a Capital One Bowl? It used to be Citrus Bowl, right?
oh my
Capital
God,
One.
dude, where have you been?
I just like the real name.
It hasn't been the Citrus Bowl since like, what, 2002?
What was your highlight side dish from Thanksgiving?
Oh gosh, Scotch.
This is the Buck Around, the podcast devoted to all things Wisconsin Badger football from a fan perspective. Featuring your hosts, Richard Branch and Maxwell Brusky.
And hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Buck Around. Welcome back to episode 347 of the Buck Around. I am one half of said Buck Around, Richard Branch, and I am joined, as always, by my duplicative colleague, Maxwell Brusky.
It's better than duplicitous, I think, right?
For sure. Max, welcome to spring practice preview season
Love
for
it.
all who celebrate.
Love it. Everybody celebrates it. What are you talking about?
I know. But yeah, so it's kind of interesting. We have been quieter this year than we have in the past in sort of the gap from end of regular or postseason through to start of spring practice. And I have kind of been comfortable with it this year because we were both sort of like, I don't know how much there is to talk about. Looking at what you and I are looking for out of spring. Oh, there goes my cat for everyone who can't see. He's now tired of us. Max and I were having a sound issue. He was meowing before
It just
we
took
started.
a little bit of talking from you
Exactly. As
on
soon
the
as
air,
he's like-
and he's like, nope, the hell with this, I'm gone.
Well, he's like my wife. As soon as you start talking about Badger football, it's like, oh, God, I gotta get out of here. So there he goes. Bye, buddy.
Yay, football.
But yeah, yay football. There is no yay football from that cat. But yeah, so we sort of independently said, hey, let's pull together what we want to talk about in the spring. And I think we have like a,
you can see me, but they can't because I'm like rolling my
Yes.
eyes like, yeah.
I think 4 out of 5 were the same. Almost word for word.
Well,
So-
and not only that, I mean, I think they're kind of in alignment with the rest of the media,
Yeah.
and it's, I don't know. I don't want to be copycat or duplicative of the other media efforts, but
Right.
I don't know. I think it
Well-
just says that everybody's looking at the same thing. But I
I
did
think
want to
we
say,
have our
though,
own spin.
I did, yeah, well, of course, but
Yes.
I did want to say though too that with the kind of the quietude spread over Badgerland in terms of football. I mean, we're gonna get done with this, and then basketball is gonna play. So I think that's been, it's obviously the focus in spring in the second
Mhm.
week of March. So
Right.
there is that, but also I think there's just maybe a level of humility inside the program right now, right? Need to get back to work. What are we doing here? Where is this going? We're not coming off a New Year's Day bowl with looking at, well, playoff caliber team, and that's the goal this year. So I mean, the hype machine isn't going to be working quite the same way. And I don't know.
No.
I think that's kind of
I mean, they're at the point now where they're analyzing butt taps. And like, I think if we tap each other's butts more and
virtual.
positively reinforce, we're going to get better.
Your agenda said that this would be a butt tap free podcast.
Yeah, we're not that
So,
reinforcing.
yeah, it's
each
not
other.
happening.
No. That was an amazing little tidbit from Brady Collins. Thank you. You haven't seen it. I don't know. For me,
It's Brady
really been-
Collins.
Yeah.
Like, that's just, it's on brand.
Like coaches love there's one simple trick rules. Like they really do. They love those books. They love those kinds of things. Here's the one simple trick to become a millionaire that the forbidden knowledge no one's teaching you. Like they love those books. Between that and thinking of Billy Edwards screaming cadences into his phone or in his empty apartment, like that one.
I thought that was
That
pretty
one is
funny.
awesome. Yes, it made me laugh.
Yeah.
Like each time I read it, I'm sure he didn't say it that way. I want to give him a piece of, but just the way it reads in print, it just makes me giggle. So I am kind of glad, this stuff that feels a bit more well, we got to dig a little deeper to figure out some success. Like, I'm glad that phase is over and we can start, talking about what guys look like in pads and other unimportant things that obsess us. So, with that behind us, shall we get to our 5 things to watch in spring?
Yeah, I think we're
Um,
ready to do that. But other than we'll get to it, I was on both of our agendas with the
mhm.
large size outside linebackers. So, but other than that, we're not going to talk about who gained weight and the body.
If you want to.
I don't really have much. I think probably what Atticus Bertram's had the most noteworthy weight gain.
I mean, does that make it noteworthy?
I don't
When the
probably
punters
right. It's punter.
beefing up? The only one that really kind of caught me was the outside linebacker who lost weight, Ernest Willer.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess maybe he's getting to more linebacker size.
Well, that one kind of makes sense, right?
Versus being a DN, sort of 4-3 DN size.
Yeah.
So maybe. But most of them are up, right? So that was the one that sort of piqued my interest. But let's get to our spring, all right? And I wanted to start with this one. Let's just start with the offense in general, because that was one of yours on its own.
Yeah, it
Change
was. Yeah, it was. And
what are you watching for?
it'll be interesting to see like who plays where and what like the formations look like. You have wide receivers, you have tight ends, you have running backs, and obviously an entirely new quarterback room, like from
Right.
scratch entirely.
Actually, no. Milos.
Oh, with the exception of Milos, yes.
Right.
And probably get to see him chuck a couple passes, maybe, who knows. But 1 or 2 tight ends, 3 tight ends. How much? I mean, you can kind of tell based on Jeff Grimes' past what the ideas and concepts are going to be, probably. But
Mhm.
who's doing what? Because I just don't think you're not. It's spring and they're only playing themselves in scrimmages.
Right.
But like, it's hard to these things kind of all bleed over together. But like Jackson Aker now listed as a tight end.
That doesn't surprise me.
It doesn't surprise me either, but it's still noteworthy.
So, watching some of the interviews Jeff Grimes did, or listening for whatever medium it was in,
Mhm.
he was obviously asked about fullbacks every single time.
Yeah.
And if they'd have a fullback. And when he would explain the fullback, he would say, we love the idea of a fullback or a tight end who you can use in different places on the field. Some version of that when he gave the explanation in the answer. That's what that is. I mean, Jackson Aker's going to play the same position he played last year.
Right. But
It has a different
but
name.
now listed
but it's
as a
gonna be the
tight
same.
end.
But I mean, does it change anything? Again,
I don't think it
goes back
does.
to my topic.
But they made a
But-
point of listing him that way.
Well, I don't think they were going to list him as a running back anymore. I think that's more what it is. And it's who is he going to practice with and who is his position coach.
Yeah.
Right? So
yeah.
now he's in Nate Letton's room. Honestly, if you really think about it, a fullback should always be in a tight end room. If you ask me, like, they're not running backs. It's a different position.
Yeah, I would
Sure,
agree
they
with
may
that.
get
I would
handed
agree
the
with that.
ball, but
Yeah, I would agree with that.
to your point, it will be interesting to see do the stretch tight ends still really matter? Like, is that what they're going for? Because like Koziol is not, I mean, he's a guy who averaged like 8 yards of reception. I mean, he is a possession guy.
He is, but he's not. He didn't block a whole hell of a lot, though.
Right.
Right? In a comprehensive running scheme, it's not what he did.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't have the stretch kind of body, I suppose. I mean, he's more of a classic, I don't know, what would you say, Wisconsin type tight end body.
Yeah, like Fumagalli,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And he's 260 pounds. I mean,
Mhm.
he's a big boy.
Yeah. And an
So-
an NFL potential type dude. And if you're gonna do that, you're gonna have to block a lot.
Yeah.
Not
I think
everybody's
especially.
Evan Ingram or Travis Kelsey or
Exactly.
That's it is, even in the NFL, it's pretty rare.
Yeah, so I didn't even think to put that on there, and this isn't to take away your thinking, but for me, I don't know how much I'm going to be able to see and learn.
Yeah,
that
and you
regard.
just can't. So I don't know, and I think that's the caveat for everything else. So it's really kind of what can you glean from observations of actual facts.
Okay.
You know what I
So-
mean?
Yes.
And what you can see, because you can, I'm sure you can get stuff from schemes and formations but you're going to get it from the media. It's not like you can, I can't go watch it.
No,
You
April
know.
19th you can.
Yes. Well, depending on what that's called. Or, well, I may go
They had
either
a
way,
name for
but,
it.
you know,
They
but
just announced the name
but-
for it. It's
oh,
like
they did?
Fan Day or something.
what is it?
I mean, within the last hour. I'll look it up.
Okay. Obviously, this is really important. But it's not like you're going to get firsthand observations either. And, I trust the people that are going to be there. But I think that's really what you're looking at is there going to be 2 running backs on the field.
Oh my
3
gosh,
tight
spring
ends.
favorite.
All that stuff. And they'll do 4th down drills out of the shotgun.
It is the Wisconsin Football Spring Showcase, which includes a 2-hour scrimmage.
I like that. That's
On,
spring
noon
showcase
to
makes
2.
sense. No, that makes sense. That's really what it should be.
Yeah, so I guess like to your point, I think what you're going to learn this week is what do they install first? Because that's going to be the core of the offense.
Mhm.
And you
Yeah,
assume
yeah.
that's going to be the 12 personnel stuff starts this week.
Mhm.
And they sort of branch out from there. But
I guess, a part of that is the wide receivers. And is there going to be like a spring breakout star? And if it's somebody like, I don't know, Jaden Ballard, you know what I mean? And I don't know what that'll tell you, but it might tell you something.
I think it would tell you
how many
what the rest of
50-yard
the room
bombs
is.
is Vinny Anthony going to get?
Well, let's put it this way.
Yeah.
Let's use your hypothetical.
Yeah.
You obviously know who Vinny Anthony is. After Vinny Anthony, there's Tretch, who's Tretch. And like, I kind of feel like I know what Tretch is, and I'm kind of curious what he does
Mhm.
in this when there's less. I mean, there'll be 11 personnel stuff. The thing that I'm really interested in is the rest of them, right? Like Quincy Burrows, Joe Griffin, who's coming off a 1-year hiatus.
Right.
Terrell Henry's been around. Chris Brooks has been around. Like if Jaden Ballard leapfrogs all those guys, I feel like it says more about those guys than it does Jaden Ballard.
Or that, or and
Mark Hamper, the new
Hilton
guy.
is in for spring.
Yeah, he is.
And then
There's 13 wide receivers on the roster.
yeah, and then it's Mark what again?
Hamper.
Hamper. I'm interested to see what he's gonna be like. I mean, he was a highly sought after transfer.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ballard, maybe to your point, I think the wide receiver room, the 2 transfers really tell you a lot of the story. I
Yeah.
think. Just where they sort of fall into
Right.
the pecking order.
Right. And injuries notwithstanding, I'll be interested to see like how much of their name is going to be in the reports. So, but that's an interesting one because they haven't really had the transfers, I don't think, at that position that were, I don't know, I guess kind of splashy.
I mean,
Or somebody like, well, and
Pauling-
Hamper was pretty highly sought after though.
Yeah, I mean, there was company. I guess Pauling was a freshman. He doesn't count.
Well, and he also came with Fickle too.
Yeah, that's what I
Yeah,
mean.
yeah. So anyway, yeah. But before we move on, I don't want to leave that out there, or I don't want to leave that off.
So here's what I am watching, and you mentioned the position group as well, but I am watching for something specific.
Mm-hmm.
I am waiting to see if this spring we get to see that there is an obvious, very good or better running back in the running back. It has been 5 years since Jonathan Taylor left, right? You've had 5 seasons since he's left, and there has not been one of those guys who's like a breakout running back since. Sorry, Braylon Allen. Fine running back, but not a great running back. And I feel like for this offense, if it has a very good or better running back in that room, it's going to solve a lot of problems on its own. The way the offense is going to reshape, the way they're going to lean on the running back more, if you just have a good running back, that's going to solve a lot of problems. It's going to make Billy Edwards better. It's going to make the wide receiver room better. It's going to make the tight ends look better. It's just going to make everything look better because I already know, like, the offensive line, I don't know if it's going to be really good, but I know it's going to be fine.
Yeah, I don't think we
there's
need
enough
I don't
coming
think we need
back.
to dedicate much air to that.
I don't even have it on my list.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not really even, I mean, I have a pretty good idea who the 5 are going to be or
Right.
who's in the mix. We'll see if we get answers on it by the end of spring. But for me,
I don't think anybody's
a running
hurt
back just-
either, for that matter. A lot of times you have them sitting, some projected starter sitting out. So I don't even think you have that. Sorry.
yeah. So
Yeah.
regardless, but I mean, just for me, like the running back room is where the offense sort of begins and ends. because if Darian Dupree or, Dylan Jones kind of breaks out, like that's a good sign. Even if like Cade Giacomelli, you're like, oh wow, this guy's a really good fit for this offense, which I think he kind of is. He's just a cut and go guy.
Yeah,
like he may be the guy that sneaks out. I don't know if that's going to be, okay, he's going to be a very good to great running back, but some kind of clarity there that says, okay, they have a clear number one guy who is good. Like that's really kind of what I'm curious to see if that emerges. Because if it does, again, all the other things just rising tide.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, right. Well, you're probably going to get some negative comments on the Braylon Allen thing. I don't know whether he's an all-time great, but and I will. I'm going to just leave that there. So interesting about running backs. There's no transfer,
right,
and no freshman.
Well, there will be in the fall.
Okay,
which I'm going to get to in my last one. As of right now,
yeah,
there is Harry Bortolotti who announced a commitment as a walk-on, and we'll get into why I think that is later. But
why that's noteworthy.
It is noteworthy. He is the only known walk-on commitment to Wisconsin football for the fall. There was one other guy who was offered and announced, that he got an offer, but he ended up taking a scholarship to a directional Michigan. I forget his name. But we'll get to that. He's not on the roster now. He's interestingly not on the fall list, which may mean something, but maybe that's only scholarship players. We don't know. And there may be more pieces to that. To be determined. Again, I want to circle back to that one. We'll put a pin in that for my last point. But let's go back to the defense, because we both had a version of what is the quality and composition of the defensive line. And I am curious, how are you watching that and how are you going to assess that?
Oh boy, that's interesting. I think it really still comes down to the names. Like who are you seeing the most of?
Right.
Yeah. And who's challenging for air quotes here, starters snaps, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And that one's really interesting because the entire room was remade except for two guys and Dylan Johnson you just don't know about. And you noted it on the agenda where he sits on the depth chart, and he was probably, if last year, he's probably the person that the defensive lineman that people were looking forward to seeing more of, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So if whether or not that's the case, and I don't know what what psychology is in play there. And I do say psychology because that was also over the last 2 years a position group that saw a lot of transfers out of the program, especially last year. It's kind of funny because it seems like they all went to Illinois to go play for Philo, the defensive lineman.
So the way I am trying to figure out how to assess this, right? Because you've got Parker Peterson, JVR Suggs, and Charles Perkins, who are officially defensive linemen.
Mm-hmm.
So you have 12 of them in that group right now. That's including the walk-ons, and not including what we'll get to next, which is the 300-pound outside linebackers. But Dylan Johnson, to me, is the best, I think, player you can use to measure what's going on with this team. And what I will be spending spring doing with the defensive line is determining whether Dylan Johnson's ascension or Dylan Johnson's decline or, fall on the depth chart is a good or bad thing. Because he's going to do one or the other. And you have to decide, okay, if he's now like the number 3 guy, is that because he's gotten that much better? Because of the guys last year, like you said, when you're watching that game last year, he was the only guy you said, okay, this one could get better. He's a true freshman. The last freshman who played as defensive lineman on this Badger team, granted redshirt freshman, not even true freshman, ended up having pretty good Badger careers. So you're like, okay, this guy should theoretically get better as he gets older. He's a guy that averaged 12 snaps a game this past year. Maybe he's ready for more. If he's ready for more and able to get them, does that just mean these other guys they brought in are more replacement level types? Which I am always now, that's my assumption with everybody in the portal now until proven otherwise. It's just you're getting replacement level players. So what is he doing? That's all I want to know. Like, where is he getting his snaps, or where are his snaps being taken away? Is it because somebody else is bubbling up? Like if Jamel Howard jumps him, that's noteworthy. I don't think that's happening, but if something like that happens, that's interesting. But if, he's buried behind these 3 other transfer guys who are in the rotational mix with Barton and Lane, you're like, oh, That's not a good sign. But if he's on, he's playing ones with Barton and these other ones are behind him, then you're like, oh, well, that's intriguing, right? Like that tells me he got better. Or if one of these other guys sort of, I don't see true freshmen making big strides in spring, but if somebody else is in the mixer, then it maybe tells you a different story. But I think our story for the defensive line as observers is going to come, like the only route for that train to get to its destination is through Dylan Johnson, to make a very strained metaphor. I don't know. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, which are the true freshmen that are in?
I think Petaway and Akaponu.
They are. So that's what I thought. And I'm looking over the roster right now, and that's what I thought they are in for spring. It'd be kind of cool to see them play a lot.
I mean, there's 12 defensive linemen.
Yeah.
Right? In camp here. They have 106. I mean, I think it's 106 players for spring. And spring is different because you can go,
you can
over
play above the limit.
105.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So it is, I think, interesting that they're a little thinner. So a lot of these guys are going to get snaps. Now it's going to be 3s and 4s, but they're going to play. And we know from what Fickle's said in the past, it's like if you bring these guys in, you don't bring them in not to give them a taste in the spring. So if they're going to come early, make their time worth it.
Make their time.
Right?
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. I guess if they are they making plays, and what are they doing? Do you have, because that's not, I mean, it's been the problem though since Benton's been gone, is there's no War Daddy in there.
Well, it's against, who is it against? Like it's really, to me,
the
more telling thing.
I get that. Although they will be presumably, going against a pretty solid offensive line, right?
Yeah. Well, but again, are they going against the 4s?
I know.
Are they going against the 3s?
Of course.
So, we'll see.
But if somebody's, if there is a freshman or a redshirt freshman or a Dylan Johnson that's making plays, I mean, against the ones, I mean, it would be something to see, but I'm not saying anything that everybody already doesn't know, but it's been a position of weakness for quite some time since Benton's been gone.
All right, so let's go to the next one. I'll put this simply: 300-pound outside linebackers. WTF?
I don't even. Did I say that? I just put like two or three question marks, but
yes,
I think I had 290 instead of 300.
Yes, WTF was something I made up on the spot, Max. I'm like a jazz musician here. You got to have a little bit of
little improv.
Spontaneity. Yeah, what. I don't know. I mean, what? I guess my only question is I don't get the purpose. It's trying to understand the purpose.
I don't have any
these
thoughts.
Are defensive ends.
Other than to say it seems incoherent.
My only thought is it's a technique thing, right? So it's sort of like they are going to be dedicated like 5 tech guys,
I get that, but if that's the case, then there's 12 interior defensive linemen.
Yeah, or they're gonna. Yeah, it's a very fair question. I don't know, but of those 12, mind you, 2 of them are Will McDonald and Nolan Vills.
Yeah.
Who? Oh, and sorry, and you know what?
2 of 12.
In my 12 is Drayden Patey, who's coming in the fall. So it's 9 scholarship, 2 walk on.
Sure.
So there's 11 for spring.
It seems like a lot for 2 or 3 positions, and then you go back to this thing where they had 2 down linemen against Iowa.
Yeah.
So I don't know what what that means. And I guess if you could look at it in a way like run defense is like front 7 with some spice from defensive backs. Or like a guy like Hunter Wooler, who's just as good on near the line of scrimmage as elsewhere on the field. So if you look at it from a whole like a front 7 or I guess front 6, if we're going to talk about like the heavy nickel or 3-3-5 kind of thing, I don't know where did those. Yeah, I don't know because it's also not like a 4-3 defensive ends. They're not, the best ones in college are usually like 275 to maybe 290. And they're 6'3", 6'4", 6'5", like that kind, that classic 4-3 defensive end. They're not there. And the other part of that too is we're talking about the weight loss and body thing is Willer. And he was probably, I don't know, wasn't he one of the 2, wouldn't you agree? He's one of like the 2 or 3 biggest gets of that class.
He was that sort of surprise late guy.
Yeah. And he's losing weight. And I'm looking at the roster now. I'm looking at him and it says DL. I'm looking at what's online at the UW Badgers site. Maybe
that's out of date.
But
yeah. The one that we have in our inbox is the one to use.
Is
They
the
haven't
one,
updated the
and
one
he's
online.
listed as
He's
listed
an
as
outside linebacker.
is out OLD. Okay,
Yeah. I don't know if you remember, they moved him to outside linebacker at the end of camp.
I do. No, I remember that.
And
Yeah,
so
no, I
he
remember
was
that.
theoretically an outside linebacker. And they just never changed the online roster. That one, I think, is still last year's, to be totally honest.
But he's a guy that,
Um,
that you really have expectations for.
So, for me, like if you're looking, the outside linebacker room is really funny to me, right? Because you saw, actually, they had some to tie into those 300-pound guys, there was some very real talk, I think is a fair term to use, by Brady Collins about Daryl Peterson. And it's like, he's putting on weight. He's not an edge rusher. We're not going to ask him to be something he's not. It's more or less the line he used. He is now the edge setter, more in the Aaron Witt, lesser degree Jeff Petrowski role that you've seen the last couple of years, to be that, not so much a pass rush guy, but to be a little bit more stout in the run.
Mhm.
But then you kind of wonder, like, the thing I keep asking about these linebackers is like, what's the difference between him and then Corey Walker, right? Or what's the other big boy? Michael Garner, right? I am assuming, to your point, they are outside linebackers against Iowa or in that kind of run situation. And it's with their length, it's almost like they're more like a 3-4 D end. And you're going to see them sort of, even though they are an quote unquote outside linebacker. Again, I don't know why they're in that room. Maybe we'll see if we can get Mitchell back and ask him. But that is the closest thought I have without seeing anything. And that's going to be the thing I want to watch in practice, is like, what is that role? What changes on the defense? Because I do feel like, lost in new offensive coordinator talk, the deployment of personnel on defense is definitely indicating there is a shift, right? It's a defense that's going to get heavier, and it's a defense that's going to get a little more, right, like box heavy, for lack of a better term.
Yeah.
So I am curious to see where
And
that ends up.
I think the whole thing too is, I was kind of thinking about this, that even like you said, even with a coordinator switch, I still feel like there's a little bit, like, a little bit more about what's going on offense than you do on defense. And I think it's one of the entire Fickle era, it's always been, or with Tressel, that you never can quite tell what the defense is supposed to be, or who's, like, there's always seems like people are playing out of position, or the scheme isn't effective, and I don't know how much you'd be able to tell from spring whether that's going to change, but like, wouldn't you say that's like the biggest thing? And then, I mean, they go ahead, they go and having a performance like they did against Oregon, where whatever they did, it seemed to work.
Yeah.
But against Iowa or Nebraska, they were just awful.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess I don't have that much clarity on it anyway. And having outside linebackers that are 290 and 300 pounds gives me less clarity than I had before,
Okay.
which was already pretty minimal.
I'm wondering if outside linebackers at 300 pounds is the equivalent of Jackson Aker as a tight end on offense.
That could be too.
What I want. That's all I want to learn.
And I'll bet if we had Mike Tressel right now on, like, talking to him, I think he'd probably say something along the lines of, well, where the, what the letters are that says your position, don't read too much into that, or you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Something along those lines. I also kind of thought too, I wonder if there is an element of they want him with Mitchell rather than with, why am I blanking on the defensive line coach?
EJ Willow.
Yeah, Willow. I don't know.
And why?
I don't know. That's what I'm just throwing it out there. That maybe there's some tactical maneuvering there.
Okay, fair enough. I think then I only have one last bit to touch on.
Sure.
Which is this part I'm really intrigued with. And it's the really weird 300-pound gorilla that is in the room, college football right now, which is there's this whole settlement right out, the stuff that I find that I don't want to follow because I'm not interested in college football, which is this settlement that's been put forward where the NCAA is going to go to a 105 player roster, right? And walk-ons as a separate category of player go away. And so you're going to have a hard cap on a team of 105 players, which in reality isn't a huge change in terms of how big, a roster used to be like 110, 112, that kind of number,
Something
maybe
like that.
115 on a bigger year. But the last 10 on there, you probably never heard about, and a lot of them churned out every year because it was an immediate, oh my gosh, we need a scout team quarterback, or we need a fourth quarterback for spring.
Well, and it's composed of freshmen and sophomore walk-ons.
Yes. It's like the Bobby Dunns of the world.
Yeah, right. Milos.
Go back in time. Well, Milos is still around. But so I have been kind of interested in this because as of right now, the Badgers have, let me just double check my number. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Nobody loves more than listening to somebody count on a podcast, by the way. The Badgers have 106 players on this roster that they sent out earlier in the week that we have here. That's 100. So that's one over what this proposed limit is going to be, which is kind of like at this point, we used to use 85 as a scholarship number. Like no one's really giving clear answers about what's going to happen with Wisconsin and da-da-da-da-da-da. But the best assumption you can make now, I guess, is that they are going to go to 105. So as of right now, they are one player over what they can have come fall. Now, the Badgers still have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 scholarship players who are quote unquote summer arrivals. They're the guys that aren't in for spring. So that gets you to 114. And then they have one player, as we mentioned earlier, Harry Bortolotti, who is the younger brother of, take a guess, Grover Bortolotti. Yeah. Who is on the roster for spring and will be around. I'd be really surprised if he wasn't for the fall.
Right. Yeah, me too.
He announced a commitment, I want to say a few months ago, right? Maybe even a little bit more to the Badgers. I could look it up. I should have written it down. But as a walk-on, what little digging I can do, there are stories written about him committing as a walk-on, quotes from him, born to be a Badger, blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. His social media, his Twitter account shows him as a UW football commit. As recently as, I want to say a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, he retweeted a happy birthday wish to Jared Thompson, who is, one of those like recruiting staffers or some kind of football staffer. So he seems to be very much still connected by any indication to Wisconsin football. So I'm assuming he's in the count. So that puts the team at 115 players come fall. So again, assuming this settlement gets cleared, they need to find 10 bodies to cut. They got to do some bloodletting between the end of spring and summer and fall to get themselves to the 105. And I am really curious if we are going to see sort of like people I'm really curious to see how this plays out in spring practice. If it's, like, do you sort of do litmus tests on guys? Because like, if you go through this roster, like, and I'm not picking on people, but there's guys like Cam Fain, Angel Toombs, Evan Vandenhoven, Garrison Soliday. Well, he's played a bunch of snaps.
Oh,
but like,
yeah.
guys, the first three have not really played snaps, right?
No, I saw the last time I saw Toombs was at the launch.
Yeah, he has not played a snap. He's moved around. He's now an outside linebacker. Like the outside linebacker room, if everyone was to come back, would have 14 players in it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't believe that, right? And then they have a redshirt freshman in Cody Raymond. And I'm like, what's going to happen? Because the team has, I marked them all off, including specialists, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21 walk-ons on it. Players who were walk-ons who, as far as we know, still are. Is that where the bloodletting is going to come? Because you have 5 guys in the offensive line room who are walk-ons. Now, some of them, like Kerry Kadanko's not going anywhere. He was in the 2 deep last year, effectively. John Clifford's a 5th-year senior. Like, do you keep that guy around? I don't think he's really played, maybe some special team snaps, but it gets kind of interesting to me to see how that is going to get managed in spring. And if you're going to see guys effectively competing for roster spots, which is what's going to happen here. And it may just change the dynamic of spring and how that goes forward, because those sort of like borderline, like I think the older guys, the Owen Arnett's and like Charlie Jarvis is another guy. I mean, I think he had a good special teams play this last year. I think he maybe even almost got a punt block or something.
Okay.
But it's like one of these guys, like who they use and they deploy, like are those guys the ones who are safe? Or is it, more like those guys are going to let go for younger players that they're going to use down the line in their mind? Because they have a numbers problem that they have to address through spring and at the end of spring. And I'm very curious to see how that shakes out because it's maybe a little strange.
Yeah, I agree. It'd be interesting to see what other teams have going on in that regard.
Well, that's the thing. I think you're going to have a massive transfer portal in come springtime if
Right.
this thing goes through the way it is, because other teams are in similar situations.
I would
they
imagine.
unless they turned off the spigot on walk-ons 2 years ago, which nobody would have because you didn't know that this thing was coming. Like that house settlement was not, this isn't a 2-year-old settlement. This is reasonably recent, in terms of recruiting.
I think
cycles.
that suit was filed maybe a year ago.
Right, but the settlement that was put forward, right? That is not that old in terms of recruiting cycles.
No.
Everybody's going to be kind of in this similar situation where rosters are going to be cut down and the transfer portal in spring is going to be massive with no place for these guys to go, which is a whole different story.
Yeah, that's actually what that's what I was getting at with everybody being in the same boat.
Yeah.
Everybody's going to be doing that. And where do they go? They'll have to go down divisions.
Yeah. Just to
Which
find
is-
roster space.
Well, and I guess that, I don't know, because the the transfer portal activity, so much of it, unless you're 10, 15 teams, you're getting a lot from the lower divisions. So now it's gonna go the other way around, which I think is probably fascinating. You probably don't have quite so much team relegation and promotion, but you have
Mhm.
individual player relegation and promotion.
Right.
Right?
So
Oh, that's
We'll
kind
see
of
what happens.
that's an interesting dynamic. And as far as I'm aware, there isn't any timeline on that, right?
the settlement's coming up pretty soon.
Yeah.
It's before the judge, and I don't know the date. No, that's
And there's an agreement tentatively in place. It just has to be approved by the judge.
yes.
Yeah,
That's exactly where it's at.
yeah. That's what I.
It's a settlement, and
Right,
it's
right.
been, I want to say, since late fall, right? So it wouldn't have been in the last cycle.
No, it would not.
Um,
No, and it was late fall. That sounds about right.
Yeah, and none of this is stuff I'm actually interested in knowing. I'm going to be dead honest.
No, but if
Like,
we're
I looked
talking
it up the other
rosters
day
in
'cause I-
spring, like spring is the time to talk about it.
Yeah, but I was like, ugh, all right, let me just understand what's going on here, or try to get a baseline understanding, because I'm not going any deeper in it. But I will be interested to see what happens. I think that's it for me in terms of spring, and I have been cycling through what's been posted. Lots of there was a fullback question marks. So I don't think there's anything crazy we need to touch on after day one. We can, I guess, maybe if there's enough to talk about, we come back next week, go over that. The official Wisconsin Badger football account is referring to Billy Edwards as QB1. Not that we didn't think that, but they are officially placing the crown upon his head, and he's doing some kind of video where he's winking and pointing. So he is quarterback dude, apparently. So I'm very excited to watch this when we're done.
I am
See
too,
what he has to say.
actually. Not
Right, so I think
that,
on
not
that
that. Just Billy Edwards in general.
Yeah, no, I'm in on Billy Edwards.
Yeah, I am
as
too.
I told you.
I am too.
So we'll see what he does, but I get good vibes. All right, I think on that note, Max, we wrap this thing.
I think so too. All
right.
Yeah, and like you said too. I mean, the practice is like going on as we speak, as we
no.
record,
It is wrapped, sir.
or it's
This is
wrapped.
the end.
Okay, so
Yeah,
and we're not going back and changing anything.
nothing. All right. So on that note, thank you, everyone. And by the way, by the time everybody hears this, happy birthday.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. It would be Monday. Yes.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Till next time.
Enjoy the conversation? Head on over to buckaroundpodcast.com to find all the ways to connect with the show, links to our Patreon page, and feeds for every major podcasting platform. We want to thank each and every one of our patrons. You make this podcast possible. This has been The Buck Around, Badger football analysis from a fan perspective.